On the 24th of August, 1994, in San Jose, California, 4 men sat down over beers and designed a company. 3 of them were engineers. Ross Smith had run marketing at a graphics firm that had already gone bankrupt. Scott Sellers had designed circuits at Silicon Graphics. Gary Taralli had written one of the earliest networked multiplayer games on an SGI workstation in 1983 and spent the decade since pushing polygons faster than anyone thought possible. The 4th man, Gordy Campbell, was a venture capitalist who had asked Smith a simple question during a failed job interview. "What do you actually want to do?" Smith said he wanted to build 3D graphics accelerators for personal computers with 2 other guys. Campbell said, "Then do that." They called the company 3DFX Interactive. Their first chip, the SST-1, carried its creator's initials in its designation: Sellers, Smith, Taralli, 1. They had encoded their own names into silicon. By 1998, 3DFX controlled an estimated 85% of the 3D accelerator market. Its annual revenue had exploded from $44 million to over $200 million. Its stock traded above $35 a share. Its proprietary graphics API, Glide, was the standard that every major PC game was built to run on, and the purple 3DFX logo on a game box was a seal of quality that millions of gamers recognized on sight. On the 15th of December 2000, Nvidia announced it would purchase 3DFX's core assets for $70 million in cash and 1 million shares of stock. Today, Nvidia is worth over $5 trillion. The technology 3DFX built sits inside the most valuable company on Earth, and the name 3DFX exists nowhere except in the hands of collectors who still power up Voodoo cards in machines older than most of their owners. This is how a company created the GPU revolution and then lost it. You're watching American Electronics and Tech, where we take apart the companies that built the electronic world, down to the circuit board and the engineer who designed it. If that's your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because this rise is just as strange as this fall. To understand 3DFX, you have to understand where its founders came from and what they were running from. In the early 1990s, the most advanced 3D graphics on the planet lived inside Silicon Graphics workstations. These machines cost tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands, and they rendered the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park and the liquid metal in Terminator 2. They were beautiful, powerful, and utterly irrelevant to anyone who played video games on a personal computer. Gary Taralli had been at SGI since the early 80s. He had written Dogfight, a demonstration program that let users fly combat over a network in rendered 3D on SGI Indigo workstations. It was a landmark in both multiplayer gaming and real-time graphics, and almost nobody outside SGI's campus ever saw it. Taralli was the kind of engineer who could write simulation code that brought prototype hardware to life before the production line existed. He would later carry an algorithm through his work at SGI and into 3DFX, a piece of mathematical sleight of hand for computing fast inverse square roots that would eventually surface in the source code of Quake 3 Arena and become one of the most famous code tricks in the history of programming. But in 1993, Taralli was consulting for Kubota, and the path from workstation graphics to consumer cards was not obvious. Smith and Sellers had taken a more bruising route. Both had worked at Pellucid, an SGI offshoot that tried to bring 3D graphics to cheaper hardware. Pellucid was acquired by Media Vision, a multimedia company known for its Sound Blaster competitors. Media Vision looks like a fit for what the trio wanted to build, a company that bundled graphics and sound into consumer kits. But Media Vision collapsed into a securities fraud scandal and declared bankruptcy. The story everyone tells is that the 3 founders left SGI together to start 3DFX. The documented record is messier, running through Pellucid, Media Vision's wreckage, Kubota, and a failed job interview, and honesty requires a flag here. What is certain is that by the summer of 1994, all three had arrived at the same conclusion. The 3D graphics locked inside $100,000 workstations could be put on a $200 card if someone designed the right chip. And the right market was not Hollywood rendering farms. It was the 17-year-old playing Doom in a bedroom. Campbell's Tech Farm provided the first backing. In 1995, 3DFX raised $5.5 million from investors, including later stakes from Intel and Electronic Arts. The company was fabless from the start, designing chips and sending the designs to TSMC in Taiwan for fabrication. No factory, no production line, minimal overhead. What they had instead was the SST-1 architecture, and a bet that the price of EDO DRAM was about to fall far enough to make a dedicated 3D card affordable at retail. The SST-1 was announced at Comdex on the 6th of November 1995, and it was strange. It could not display a Windows desktop. It could not run a spreadsheet. It was a 3D-only accelerator that connected to an existing 2D VGA card through a pass-through cable, and it did exactly one thing. It rendered textured, filtered, perspective-correct 3D polygons at speeds that made everything else on the market look like a slideshow. The chip ran at 50 MHz with 4 MB of audio DRAM, 1 million transistors on TSMC's 500 nanometer process. The design split the workload between a frame buffer processor and a separate texture mapping unit, a decision that let 3DFX scale the architecture by adding more chips, an idea Tiroli had seen work inside SGI's multi-board Indigo systems. It was not a product for everyone, but it was a product for the people who had just discovered that first-person shooters were the most exciting thing a personal computer could do. And those people were about to become one of the fastest growing markets in consumer electronics. The problem was getting anyone to build a card around it. No established graphics company wanted to sell a $300 add-in board that only did 3D and required a separate card for everything else. The pitch sounded absurd, but Orchid Technologies took the gamble, and on the 7th of October 1996, the Orchid Righteous 3D appeared on dealer shelves at $299. Diamond Multimedia followed with the Monster 3D. Creative Labs followed after that. The Voodoo graphics card was loose in the world, and the world had never seen anything like it. But a card without software is a paperweight, and in 1996, there was no universal 3D graphics standard for PC games. Microsoft's Direct 3D was young and clumsy. OpenGL was built for workstations, not games. So 3DFX did something radical for a hardware company. They wrote their own API. They called it Glide, and its data formats matched the Voodoo's internal architecture exactly, eliminating the overhead that generic APIs imposed. Then, they went to every game developer they could reach and handed them the tools to build for Voodoo hardware directly. The breakthrough came from ID Software. John Carmack, the programmer behind Doom and Quake, had been working on a version of Quake that could run with hardware 3D acceleration. 3DFX convinced Carmack to port Quake to OpenGL in a form that ran on Voodoo hardware, and Carmack completed the job in a weekend. GLQuake was uploaded to the internet in early 1997. On a Pentium 166 with a Voodoo graphics card, Quake ran at 41 frames per second at 512 by 384, filtered and smooth, when the same machine produced a choppy, pixelated mess in software rendering. The difference was not incremental. It was the difference between watching a game and being inside it. Roughly 150 titles eventually supported Glide. Quake, Tomb Raider, MechWarrior, Unreal, Need for Speed. The 3DFX optimized badge on a game box became one of the most recognized logos in PC gaming, a promise that this game, on this hardware, would look like nothing else. But Glide's dominance depended on one condition that was easy to overlook in the euphoria. It worked because 3iFX sold its chips to a dozen different board partners, and every one of those partners had a stake in Glide's success. The moment 3DFX stopped supplying those partners, the ecosystem that sustained Glide would collapse. That fact sat in plain sight, and nobody talked about it. Therefore, the stakes of what happened next were higher than anyone involved seems to have understood. In early 1997, Sega approached 3DFX to develop the graphics processor for its next-generation console, the project that would become the Dreamcast. The deal was signed in February 1997, with 3DFX beginning work on a custom chip based on the Voodoo architecture. The contract generated $1.8 million in revenue in its first 9 months. But more importantly, it offered 3DFX something it had never had: a diversified revenue stream beyond PC add-in cards, locked into millions of console units. Then, 3DFX prepared its initial public offering. The IPO launched on the 25th of June, 1997 at $11 a share, and 3DFX sold 3.5 million shares. As required by United States securities law, the filing disclosed the details of 3DFX's material contracts. Every detail of the confidential Sega deal was laid out in the prospectus. Sega had been keeping the development of its next-generation console secret during an internal competition between a Japanese design team using NEC and Video Logic hardware and an American skunk works team of 11 people using 3DFX chips. The American prototype boards were silk-screened Shark and later Dural. When 3DFX publicly revealed the partnership, Sega executives, by multiple accounts, were furious. In July 1997, Sega terminated the 3DFX contract and chose the Japanese design with NEC's PowerVR graphics. 3DFX sued for breach of contract in September, demanding $200 million in damages and accusing Sega of using the development relationship to acquire 3DFX's confidential technology under false pretenses. The lawsuit eventually included NEC and Video Logic. It settled in August 1998 with terms kept secret, but the damage was done. The console revenue stream was gone. The stock lost up to 43% of its value on the news, and 3DFX remained what it had always been, a company that lived or died on the PC add-in card market. Meanwhile, a different company in Santa Clara, founded just a year before 3DFX by a man named Jensen Huang, had nearly gone bankrupt in 1996 and was now climbing back with a chip called the Rive TNT. Its name was Nvidia, and it was about to become the only alternative. Because none of that mattered yet. Not in 1998. In 1998, 3DFX was untouchable. Annual revenue hit $202.6 million, up from $44.1 million the year before. Net income reached $21.7 million. The stock peaked above $35 a share in the second quarter, 300% above the IPO price. First quarter revenues alone were $50 million, an 862% increase over the same quarter the previous year. 3DFX had 247 employees, 151 of them engineers, all based in the United States, designing chips that TSMC fabricated in Taiwan. Gross margins ran above 50%, matching Intel. By most accounts, 3DFX controlled 85% of the dedicated 3D accelerator market. The Voodoo brand was not just dominant, it was the category. And the product that cemented that dominance was the Voodoo 2. Released in February 1998 on the SST96 architecture, the Voodoo 2 doubled down on everything the original Voodoo had done right, and then added something no consumer card had offered before. 2 texture mapping units instead of 1, allowing the chip to draw multi-textured frames in a single pass. A clock speed of 90 MHz, up from 50. 8 or 12 megabytes of audio DRAM, running at 100 MHz, and a technology called SLI, Scan Line Interleave, which allowed 2 Voodoo 2 cards installed in the same PC to render alternate scan lines of the display in parallel, effectively doubling the pixel fill rate. On a Pentium 2 266, a Voodoo 2 SLI setup ran GL Quake at 80 frames per second. Nothing else on the market came close. Not the Nvidia Riva TNT, not the ATI Rage 128, not the Matrox G200. If you were a PC gamer in 1998, the Voodoo 2 was not a luxury. It was what you asked for at Christmas. It was the card that turned Half-Life from impressive to immersive, that made the underwater levels in Tomb Raider 2 shimmer, that let Unreal's outdoor environments stretch to a horizon that software rendering could never reach. The original Voodoo had proved 3D acceleration was real. The Voodoo 2 proved it was necessary, and here is the detail that people who owned these cards remember. The Orchid Righteous 3D, the very first retail Voodoo card from 1996, had a pair of mechanical relays on the board. When a 3D application launched and the Voodoo chipset engaged, those relays clacked. A physical, audible click, the sound of the card switching from pass-through to rendering. Later, revisions used solid-state relays and the click disappeared. But for the people who heard it, that sound was the threshold. Click, and the screen transformed. Click, and you were inside the game. No other piece of computer hardware has ever announced itself like that. But in December 1998, while the Voodoo 2 still ruled every benchmark and every Christmas list, 3DFX made the announcement that would destroy it. The company would acquire STB Systems, a major graphics card manufacturer based in Richardson, Texas, for $141 million in stock. 3DFX would stop selling chips to third-party board partners. It would manufacture and sell its own branded cards exclusively, using STB's production facility in Juarez, Mexico. The board partners who had built the Voodoo empire, Diamond, Creative, Canopus, Orchid, every one of them were cut off, and every one of them needed a new chip supplier. There was only one viable option, and it was already waiting with product samples and competitive pricing. The company that would inherit 3DFX's abandoned partners, and with them the entire market, was Nvidia. You can read the STB acquisition two ways, and Honest History holds both readings at once. One reading says 3DFX looked at ATI, which made both chips and cards successfully, and made a rational bet that the graphics market was consolidating, that controlling the full product from silicon to retail box meant capturing more margin per unit in an industry where margins were thinning. The other reading says 3DFX's management, led by CEO Greg Ballard, a marketing executive hired from Capcom in late 1996, overestimated the strength of their brand and underestimated the loyalty of their partners, believing that gamers would buy 3DFX cards regardless of who else was selling what. Both readings have evidence behind them, but the consequence was singular and devastating. Every board partner 3DFX abandoned became an Nvidia customer within months. 3DFX did not just lose its partners, it funded its competitors' distribution network. The STB integration closed in May 1999, and the problems were immediate. STB's manufacturing plant in Juarez had quality control issues that caused some system integrators to switch to Nvidia-based cards. The Voodoo 3, released in April 1999 on the Avenger chip, was fast and clean at 16-bit color, with clock speeds up to 166 MHz and a fill rate that competed with anything on the market in raw speed. But it lacked two things that were about to matter enormously. It could not render in 32-bit color depth, and it had no hardware transform and lighting engine. On the 31st of August 1999, Nvidia announced the GeForce 256 and called it the world's first GPU. The term was marketing, but the technology behind it was not. The GeForce 256 integrated hardware transform and lighting, the geometry calculations that position objects in 3D space and compute how light falls on surfaces, directly onto the chip. Every 3D card before it, including every Voodoo ever made, left those calculations to the CPU. The GeForce moved the entire graphics pipeline onto a single processor. It shipped on the 11th of October at $179. Nvidia had not just caught up. Nvidia had redefined what a graphics chip was supposed to do, and 3DFX's newest product was architecturally a generation behind on the day it launched. 3DFX's answer was the VSA 100, codenamed Napalm, a chip designed around what 3DFX did best: scaling performance by putting multiple processors on one card, the Voodoo scalable architecture. The Voodoo 5500, with two VSA 100 chips running at 166 MHz and a total of 64 MB of SDRAM, shipped in June 2000 at $299. It delivered the best full-scene anti-aliasing in the industry, smooth and clean at a time when Nvidia's anti-aliasing implementation was rough, but it still had no hardware transform and lighting. And the card 3DFX needed, the one that was supposed to reclaim the throne, never shipped at all. The Voodoo 6000 Sour was a monster. 4 VSA 100 chips, each with 14 million transistors and 32 MB of SDRAM, for a total of 128 MB on a single card, the highest memory capacity of any consumer GPU in 2000. It was nearly a foot long. It drew so much power that it required an external AC adapter, a brick 3DFX called Voodoo Volts, because the AGP slot and the motherboard could not supply enough current, and it had bugs. The quad-chip configuration would not run reliably in AGP 4X mode, the interface standard that Intel's newest motherboards required. The card worked, prototypes existed. Engineer Hank Semenek reworked late-stage units to run stable 8x full-scene anti-aliasing across all 4 chips. But it was not ready for production, and 3DFX was running out of time and money. The financial unraveling was swift. By mid-1999, revenues had nearly doubled to $104.8 million for the fiscal quarter. But income had collapsed from $9 million in profit to $11.6 million in losses. Even excluding one-time charges from the STB merger, the company lost $4.3 million. The Voodoo 3 and Voodoo 5 sold, but not in the numbers required to sustain a company that now bore the overhead of a manufacturing operation, a retail sales force, and the debt from a $141 million acquisition. In desperation, on the 16th of November 2000, 3DFX announced it would stop manufacturing cards entirely and return to selling chips to board partners. It was a reversal of the decision that had started the collapse. It came roughly 2 years too late. On the 15th of December 2000, Nvidia signed the asset purchase agreement, $70 million in cash and 1 million shares of Nvidia common stock for 3DFX's patents, trademarks, brand names, and chip inventory. The deal closed on the 18th of April 2001. Most of 3DFX's engineers were absorbed into Nvidia. Some went to ATI. Some left the industry. In October 2002, 3DFX filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the Northern District of California. The value destruction, stated plainly. A company that had generated $202 million in annual revenue, commanded 85% of its market, and traded above $35 a share, sold its entire intellectual legacy for less than half what it had paid for STB systems alone. A company Nvidia bought for $70 million had, 2 years earlier, been worth more than $500 million on paper. Today, the company that absorbed those assets is worth over $5 trillion. 247 people worked at 3DFX at its peak. That is not a large number. It is a small number that produced an outsized consequence. And when the company vanished, the loss was felt not in a hollowed-out company town, but in the sudden absence of a name from every benchmark, every game box, and every forum thread, where enthusiasts argued about fill rates and clock speeds. They went back to work at other companies, designing other chips. The industry moved on. The people who built the Voodoo did not get a farewell. They got job offers from the company that had beaten them. But the machines outlived the company. A prototype Voodoo 6000, reworked by Hank Semenek for stable 8x anti-aliasing, sold on eBay in 2023 for $15,000. Boxed Voodoo 5500 cards routinely sell for over $2,000. Standard Voodoo 2 cards, the ones that ran GL Quake at 80 frames per second on a Pentium 2 in 1998, still change hands for hundreds of dollars among collectors who build dedicated retro rigs around them. The Vogons Forum, the largest community for vintage PC hardware, maintains an active 3DFX section where enthusiasts troubleshoot glide compatibility, share driver patches, and debate the merits of Voodoo 2 SLI versus a single Voodoo 3 with the specificity of mechanics arguing over engine blocks. The Glide API was open-sourced before 3DFX's closure, and it lives on. The NGLide and DG Voodoo wrapper projects convert glide calls to modern Direct 3D, allowing hundreds of games from the Voodoo era to run on current hardware with enhanced resolution and anti-aliasing. Quake, Unreal, Tomb Raider 2, Half-Life in its original glide mode. These games still look and feel different on Voodoo hardware, or through a faithful glide wrapper, than they do through any generic renderer. The filtering is softer, the colors are warmer. The people who know. And then there is the invisible legacy, the one most people never see. The fast inverse square root algorithm that Gary Turali carried from Silicon Graphics through 3DFX and into the codebase of Quake 3 Arena, where it was discovered in the public source release and became perhaps the most analyzed dozen lines of code in programming history. The patents Nvidia acquired that sit inside modern GPU architectures under different names. The SLI concept that Nvidia itself would later revive and market as its own multi-GPU technology. The engineering DNA of 3DFX is distributed across the modern graphics industry like genetic material in a population that has forgotten the ancestor. In the summer of 1994, in San Jose, 3 engineers sat down and designed a chip. They called it the SST-1. Sellers, Smith, Turali, 1. They put their names into the silicon because that is what engineers do when they build something they believe will last. That chip created the 3D graphics market. That market created the GPU industry. That industry created Nvidia. And Nvidia became the most valuable company on Earth. 3DFX did not fall because Nvidia was better. 3DFX fell because it stopped being the company that had conquered the world, and by the time it tried to go back, the world belonged to someone else. The initials SST-1 appear on no modern spec sheet. The company that coined them has been bankrupt for more than 2 decades. But every GPU rendering every frame on every screen you will look at today descends in silicon lineage from the Chip 3 men named after themselves in a San Jose office 32 years ago. The names are gone. The silicon endures. If you owned a Voodoo card, worked on one, or built a rig around one, drop a comment below. Tell us the model, the game you ran on it, and whether you still have it. The people who use these cards and the engineers who built them know more about what was lost than the people who sold it. If this is the kind of history worth preserving, subscribe. We are building an archive here, one company at a time. We have the story of another American tech empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.